My name is Vinnie Tolman, and if someone had told me 20 years ago that my life would change forever in a single instant, I would have laughed and called it an exaggeration. In 2003, I was young, disciplined, and physically strong. My routine was divided between weightlifting, house building, and some sporadic jobs as an actor. I took my health, my diet, and every repetition at the gym seriously. I was never the type to take risks without thinking. I valued control, predictability. But that day, curiosity got the better of me. A close friend showed up with a new supplement, something that, according to him, promised to boost our performance and energy. He had already heard about it through acquaintances and assured me it was safe. The decision to try it seemed insignificant at the time. A small capsule, something athletes do all the time. Had I known what was to come, I would never have taken it. At first, everything seemed normal, but in less than an hour, I began to feel strange. It wasn't just a common malaise. It was as if something was shutting down inside me, a weakness growing from the inside out. First, a heat at the nape of my neck, then a tingling in my arms. My friend didn't seem well either. We tried to ignore it, take deep breaths, act as if it were merely a transient effect. But as the minutes passed, reality began to distort. My vision grew blurry. My head felt weighed down by tons. I felt my heart rate oscillating between rapid peaks and moments of utter silence. We needed to get out of there, find a way to reverse it. That's when we decided to drive to a fast food restaurant, thinking that some food might help stabilize our bodies. On the way to the bathroom, my steps became unsteady. Something inside me screamed that something was very wrong. Then when I closed the door behind me, it happened. A whirlwind of sensations overtook my body. My legs gave out, and I fell on my back. The shock of the impact was followed by overwhelming nausea, and before I could react, I began to vomit. The world darkened. And then, absolute silence. At first, I thought I was still in the bathroom. I felt a strange lightness, as if my body weighed nothing. But something was off. The silence was not normal. There was no more the buzzing of electricity, no sound of the air conditioner, no distant noises from the restaurant. Everything seemed suspended in time. Then I looked down, and the shock was instantaneous. My body was there, lying on its back on the cold floor, motionless, my jaw slack, my eyes half open with no trace of life. A trail of vomit dripped to one side, staining the shirt I had worn that morning. My first instinct was to try to take a deep breath, but I realized I didn't need to. There was no weight in my lungs. There were no lungs. Panic hit me like a cold wave. Was I dead? My mind screamed that it was impossible. My heart should be beating. I should be feeling my body. But I felt nothing, only this surreal lightness, as if I were made of air. I tried to touch my own arm, but there were no arms. Not in the way I knew them. I was consciousness, only that. And at the same time, I saw everything around me with an impossible clarity. The filthy bathroom, the distorted reflection in the mirror, the intermittently flickering fluorescent light. And then, from outside, I heard voices. Someone was knocking on the door. A man mumbled something about the bathroom being occupied. There was silence for a moment. Then, hurried footsteps. Time seemed to move in strange lapses. A manager appeared. A key turned in the lock. The door opened. And then, chaos began. The manager stepped inside and stopped abruptly. His face paled. His eyes widened. He put his hand to his mouth as if catching a choke. "My God," he whispered. A second later, he spun on his heels and ran outside, shouting for someone to call an ambulance. Other employees peeked down the corridor, exchanging confused and frightened looks. Watched all of this as if I were watching a movie in third person. But it wasn't a movie. It was me, lying there, lifeless. And the most terrifying part was that, no matter how hard I tried to speak, move, or do anything to attract attention, no one noticed me. It was as if I didn't exist. Time passed in a strange way. One moment later, or perhaps an eternity, I can't say, the paramedics arrived. Two men in blue uniforms hurried in and knelt beside my body. One checked my pulse, then looked at his partner and shook his head. No response, it's cold. The phrase cut like a blade. I wanted to scream that I was right there, seeing everything, hearing everything. But it was useless. One of them grabbed the radio and murmured medical codes, DOA, dead on arrival. It was official. My body was now just an object without an owner, something to be removed from the scene as quickly as possible. I felt a wave of pure despair invade me. Was I really dead? And if so, why was I still conscious? I watched, helpless, as my body was carefully placed inside a black bag. There was something deeply wrong in that moment. That wrapping gave me the sensation that a door was closing forever. One of the paramedics got onto the stretcher and began pushing it out of the restaurant, while the other filled out paperwork. Some people in the restaurant watched from a distance. Silently, one or two customers averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the scene. To them, I was already just a corpse being removed, a problem solved. And me? I remained there, trapped between the world of the living and something I couldn't comprehend. When they put the stretcher into the ambulance, something different happened. For the first time since I left my body, I felt a pull. Not a physical one, but as if something were calling me into the vehicle. Without understanding, I followed that impulse, and in the blink of an eye, I found myself inside the ambulance, standing next to the black bag that contained myself. There was a single paramedic with me. He was young, perhaps in his early 20s, and he seemed uncomfortable. He kept his arms crossed, staring into nothingness, as if trying to fend off an unsettling thought. Then suddenly, he frowned and looked at the bag. His body stiffened. He put his hand to his chest, taking a deep breath, as if he were listening to something. I watched him intently. Something was happening. He didn't seem merely uncomfortable. He seemed disturbed, as if he were hearing a voice that no one else could hear. His eyes turned to the corpse bag, and for an instant I saw hesitation in them. He licked his lips, uneasy. Then he murmured to himself, "This is not right." His hand trembled slightly as he extended his fingers and touched the zipper of the bag. There was a moment of absolute silence, as if time itself held its breath. Against all medical protocol, he opened the bag. His expression was one of pure uncertainty, as if he himself did not know what he was doing or why. He leaned his face over my inert body and pressed 2 fingers against my neck, searching for a pulse. Nothing. He tried my wrist. Nothing. A moment of hesitation, then a look of determination. He quickly moved away, grabbed a portable defibrillator, and switched the device on. "Let's see if you're really gone," he murmured, as if challenging some invisible force. He positioned the paddles on my chest, counted to 3, and discharged the electric shock. In that same instant, I felt something I will never forget. A brutal impact, not on my physical body, but on my consciousness, as if a thunderclap exploded around me. My vision flashed white for a second, and then everything changed. The shock was like a fissure in the fabric of reality. In an instant, I was in the ambulance, watching the resuscitation attempt, and in the next moment, everything around me dissolved into pure golden light. But it wasn't just light. It was warmth. It was sound. It was something alive. I felt myself being sucked into this infinite brightness, as if I were passing through a veil made of pulsating energy. It was impossible to describe the sensation in human words. My body, or what remained of it, seemed to vibrate at frequencies I had never experienced before. The fear that had consumed me moments earlier completely vanished, replaced by an absolute peace that left me with no desire to resist. It was then that I realized I was not alone. A presence appeared beside me, and I knew, without needing any explanation, that this being had known me long before I was even born. He had a vaguely human form, but at the same time he was unlike anything I had ever seen. His skin, if I can call it that, shone with a soft golden hue, almost as if it were made of condensed light. His eyes were deep yet without a visible depth, like windows to something immeasurable, and even without him uttering a single word, I felt a direct, telepathic communication. He knew everything about me. My joys, my failures, my deepest fears. And yet, there was no judgment, only love. The presence by my side emanated something that I can only describe as absolute, unconditional love. It wasn't the kind of love we experience on Earth, full of conditions, expectations, and limits. It was a pure, total love that enveloped me and filled me in a way I had never known possible. My first instinct was to ask who he was, but before I could even form the question, The answer emerged in my mind, as if it had been implanted there. "My name doesn't matter," he said without moving his lips, "but you can call me Drake." That name resonated within me as something familiar, as if I had heard it before, perhaps in another life, in another time. Drake raised his hand, or at least something resembling a hand, and at that very moment, the space around us expanded. Suddenly, I was no longer floating in that golden light, but instead facing an indescribable landscape. It was a place that defied any human notion of reality. The grass beneath our feet seemed made of liquid light, shimmering in shades of emerald and blue. The air was thick, but not in a suffocating way. It was charged with a vibrant energy, almost as if it were singing. On the horizon, I saw shapes resembling mountains, but they were not fixed. They seemed to change shape, as if responding to some invisible force. I didn't know where I was, but I knew that this was a sacred place. I wanted to ask exactly where I was, but once again, before doubt could form, the answer simply settled within me. "This is one of many realms of learning," Drake communicated without words. "Here, souls come to understand what they truly are, beyond the illusion of earthly life." My gaze wandered in that impossible place. There was a peace there that existed nowhere else on earth. The very ground seemed to emanate understanding, as if every speck of dust was imbued with wisdom. In front of me I saw a large structure, something resembling a temple, or a university, but different from any human building. Its shape was fluid, ethereal, as if it were being molded by the very energy of the environment. Drake gestured lightly, and at that very moment, we were transported inside the building. I didn't walk, nor did I feel my body move, but in the blink of an eye, we were there. The interior was vast, without defined walls, and filled with a soft, welcoming light. There were others present, luminous figures, some humanoid, others so abstract that my mind could barely process them. All of them radiated knowledge like living libraries. "Here, you could learn whatever you want," Drake explained, his voice echoing within me. "But it is not your time to stay." A tightness seized my being. I didn't want to leave. For the first time I understood everything. For the first time I felt that I belonged somewhere. I tried to argue, tried to express that it made no sense to go back, that this was where I should be. But Drake just looked at me with infinite compassion. "You still have work to do," he said, and at that moment my mind was flooded with images of my life. I saw moments I had forgotten, small interactions that seemed insignificant, yet had changed someone's life in ways I never realized. I saw pains I had unintentionally caused, opportunities I had let slip by, the love I could have given but did not. It was like watching a movie of my own existence from an entirely new perspective. And then, Drake did something unexpected. He touched my chest or whatever form I had there, and at that moment a wave of energy surged through my being. The sensation was indescribable. It was as if every part of me were being dismantled and reassembled at the same time, as if I were being reprogrammed with a new understanding. "Love is all that matters," he said, his voice echoing within me. "It is the only thing you take with you when you leave, and it is the only thing that truly transforms the world." I wanted to ask more, to understand better, but before I could react I felt a force pulling me back. The world around me began to distort, as if being sucked toward a distant point. The golden light faded, the vibrant colors disappeared, and in an instant, everything was replaced by the deafening sound of a constant beep. My body felt as if it were made of lead. Every cell pulsed with a deep pain, as if I had been forcibly torn from a place where I shouldn't have been. The beep was rhythmic, insistent, and gradually I realized it was coming from a heart monitor. My vision blurred, but I knew I was back. The antiseptic smell of the hospital, the feel of the rough sheet against my skin, the weight of the tubes on my nose, everything was strangely familiar, and at the same time, unbearable. I wanted to scream, to cry, to return to where I had been, but I couldn't. Something inside me knew that this was my destiny, that there was a reason I was back. In the following days, I struggled against a sadness I had never experienced before. I was alive, but I felt like a stranger in my own body. The world seemed different, small, limited. What once was important, money, status, appearance, now seemed meaningless. I spent 3 days in a coma, but in my mind, an eternity had passed. When I recounted my experience to my family, many didn't know how to react. Some believed, others looked at me with skepticism, but none of that mattered. I knew what I had lived. I knew what I had seen, and more than anything, I knew that my life would never be the same. In the months that followed, my greatest struggle was not recovering my body, but accepting that I still belonged to this world. The desire to return to that place was almost unbearable. I dreamed of the impossible colors, of the peace that enveloped everything, of the sensation of absolute belonging. But at the same time, Drake's words echoed in my mind. Love is all that matters. I began to see people differently. Small gestures took on meaning. Mundane conversations seemed like sacred opportunities. I realized that every human interaction was a chance to share the only thing we truly take with us from here: love. It was only years later, at a family reunion, that I discovered something that gave me chills. A distant relative began telling stories about our ancestors, and a name surfaced in the conversation: Drake Tolman, my great-great-great-grandfather. My heart raced. He had been a respected man, a spiritual leader in his community, and, at that moment, I knew that my experience was not a delirium, a dream, or a hallucination. Someone who had always been connected to me had guided me on that journey. Since then, my mission has been to share this truth. Life does not end here. There is something beyond, something greater, something more real than everything we know. And when the time comes, no one needs to be afraid.